Okay, my name is Hannah Kim. I'm the director of the Cheng East Asian Library here at the University of Toronto. On behalf of the East Asian Library, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. So before we begin, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. Thank you. So we're very excited to host LiterASIAN Toronto again this year in partnership with Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, or ACWW. Our library previously hosted this festival in 2018, 2019, and then there was a blip because of the COVID, and then back again 2024, and last year 2025. So this is now our 5th year hosting LiterASIAN Toronto, which feels very special to us. This year's event is also generously supported by the Canada Council for the Arts. LiterASIAN has become such an important space for celebrating Asian Canadian writers, artists, and storytellers, and for recognizing their contributions to Canada's literary and cultural communities. Over the years, the festival has welcomed many remarkable Asian Canadian writers, and some of them are here with us again today. So thank you for continuing to inspire and nurture this community. And some of the past speakers from LiterASIAN, Wang at the back, is also here. So thank you for coming all the way from Ottawa. This afternoon, we are honored to welcome 3 wonderful writers, Farzana Doctor, and we have a beautiful poster on the panel, so you will see. Please take a photo with our author after the event, but also with the beautiful posters. And we have a Wang and He. And also we have very happy to welcome back Larissa as our moderator today. Many of you already know Professor Lai as an incredible writer, scholar, and longtime supporter of Asian Canadian literature and community. As we celebrate Asian Heritage Month here in May, this is a time not only to recognize the histories and contributions of Asian communities in Canada, but also to reflect on stories of migration, identity, belonging, and creativity. At our library, we are proud to support Asian Canadian scholarship, literature, and community engagement through our collections, events, and community partnerships. For many people, libraries are more than just places that hold books. They can be places of memory, connection, discovery, and belonging. This year, LiterASIAN is taking place in 3 cities. Toronto, this is the first of the series in Toronto in May. Vancouver in June, later in June, and for the first time, Ottawa. So Wang at the back, I understand he is organizing later this year. And the 2026 theme, regeneration, feels especially meaningful. It speaks to renewal, growth, and passing of stories and experiences across generations. It also reminds us that new voices are always emerging while building on the work of those who came before them. So I think that spirit of connection across generations is really at the heart of LiterASIAN. So thank you again for being here today and supporting Asian Canadian literature and arts. And now it's my great pleasure to invite Ginny Gerard from the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop to say a few words. Ginny also serves as deputy editor of Rice Paper Magazine and president of the Dark Helix Press.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today we're gathered to celebrate Asian Heritage Month, a time to honor the stories, cultures, and contributions of Asian communities across Canada. And thank you to the University of Toronto's Chung Yu-Tung East Asian Library for hosting LiterASIAN Toronto, and the wonderful Hannah Kim for her partnership all these years. The Asian Canadian Writers Workshop is a space that encourages writers to connect, create, and support one another in sharing their voices and experiences. And we have a table at the back filled with rice paper magazine anthologies for sale, which you can check out later. In collaboration with Dark Helix Press and the Artsy Raven Literary Podcast, we've worked hard to create opportunities for writers and artists to be seen and heard. And over the years, the podcast has featured incredible guests, including Lindsay Wang twice, as well as Jin Woo Park, Abigail Heng Wen, and many more other inspiring creators from across the literary and arts community. So thank you all for being here today to support storytelling, creativity, and community. We hope this event sparks new conversations, new collaborations, and new opportunities for everybody involved. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Okay, so we have a very special program today, which is very new to LiterASIAN Toronto. So we are very happy to include a special musical performance as part of LiterASIAN Toronto. Now, I'd like to invite our guest performers to the front. Today's performance was thoughtfully selected by our guest musicians in response to this year's theme, Regeneration, exploring memory, emotion, tradition, and renewal through music. So we are delighted to welcome Amely Zhou, an accomplished erhu performer, conductor, and music director of the Canadian Chinese Orchestra, and Hong Da-chin, an internationally recognized composer and dizi performer whose work has been presented at venues including Carnegie Hall and the Kennedy Center. Hong Da is also Associate Professor of Composition and Music Theory at Western Illinois University. They will perform Three Personalities, a new work composed by Hong Da-chin this year in 2026, and inspired by the expressive and multifaceted nature of the erhu, followed by the beloved classic Racing Horse. Please join me in warmly welcoming Amely Zhou and Hong Da-chin.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. And I would like to talk a little bit about. Is this good now? Right. All right. I would like to say a few words about my composition. It's called Three Personalities. So this is a three-movement work that I dedicated to Amely Zhou, which is an erhu extraordinaire. And the first movement is called Introduction. In a very standard Chinese repertoire, there's usually an introduction. In Chinese, it's called a yingzi. So it introduces the music to the audience by having just a short amount of music at the very beginning of the music. And then in the first movement is inspired by the lyricism that erhu does very, very well. Erhu can play lyrical passages very, very well, and it can present a very emotional and poignant emotion in the music. And that's the inspiration for the first movement. And the second movement is titled Ricochet. Ricochet is a technique where when erhu player, when she or he throw the bow in between the two strings, and then it bounces. So let's say if you play the violin, a string instrument, if you throw the bow on the strings, it will bounce da 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 with a natural motion. So you will hear a lot of that in the second movement of the piece of the work. It's called Ricochet, and then Racing Horses is a very standard erhu pieces. Since this is a year of the horse, I'm sure you have heard a lot of that. And then my piece is kind of a regeneration of Racing Horses with the techniques, the lyrical passages, and the ricochet inspired by Racing Horses. And I hope you enjoy them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was just amazing. Thank you so much for the beautiful, beautiful performance. Please give them another round of big applause. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now we have been waiting for long. I'd like to welcome our moderator and panelists to the front now. Okay, and just a quick note while they're settling in, there will be a book signing after this panel, and also there will be a reception, so please stay around and then connect with our authors. Okay. Okay, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Larissa Lai, who will be introducing our featured authors and moderating today's panel. Professor Lai is the author of 9 books, including The Lost Century, The Tiger Blue, Saltfish Girl, and Slanting Eye, Imagining We. She is the recipient of multiple literary awards and has been finalist for the Governor General's Award. The French translation of The Tiger Blue was long-listed for the Grand Prix de l'Imaginaire. She is currently the Richard Charles Lee Chair of Chinese Canadian Studies at the University of Toronto. Please join me in welcoming Professor Larissa Lai.
Thank you so much, Hannah Kim, for that lovely introduction. You hear me okay? It's okay? Oh, you want me to hand hold it?
I mean, if it's okay.
Sure, yeah, fine. Better? Oh, better, right. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with you today on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm going to introduce the 3 writers, I think all at once, and then we'll have a little reading from each of them. And then afterwards, we'll have some discussion. We're going to have a good time. So here at the far end of the table is Farzana Doctor. She's a Toronto-based author, activist, and psychotherapist. She's written 5 critically acclaimed novels: Stealing Nazarene, 6 Meters of Pavement, All Inclusive, 7, and The Beauty of Us, as well as a poetry collection, You Still Look the Same, and a very useful workbook called 52 Weeks to a Sweeter Life. In 2023, Farzana received the prestigious Freedom to Read Award. In 2020, 7 was chosen as an Amnesty International Book Club Reader's Choice Pick and was shortlisted for the Trillium and Evergreen Awards. 6 Meters of Pavement won the Lambda Literary Award and the Writers' Trust Dane Ogilvy Prize, and was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award in 2012. And then next to Farzana is Jane Her. Jane Her is a New York Times best-selling and Edgar Award-winning author of YA Korean historical novels. Born in South Korea, Jane spent her formative years in the US, Canada, and South Korea before studying history and literature at the University of Toronto and working with the city's public library. Her work has been featured in Forbes, NPR, the New York Times, CBC, Vogue Korea, and KBS. She currently resides in Toronto with her family and can be spotted writing in coffee shops. I'm going to be checking out all the coffee shops across the city looking for you. And last but not least, right next to me is Jack Wang. Jack Wang is the author of the novel The Riveter, named one of the best books of 2025 by The New Yorker, The Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Star. Sorry, not the Toronto Store. I wish there was a Toronto store. We could just buy Toronto there. The Toronto Star. And the short story collection, We Two Alone, which was longlisted for Canada Reads 2022 and won the 2020 Danuta Gleed Literary Award from the Writers' Union of Canada for the best debut collection in English. His fiction has also been shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize and longlisted for the Journey Prize. He has received grants from the Canada Council for the Arts and the New York Foundation for the Arts, and in 2014-15 he served as the David T.K. Wang Creative Writing Fellow at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, England. He holds a BSc from the University of Toronto and an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Arizona, as well as a PhD in English and creative writing from Florida State University. He is a professor of writing at Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York. So I believe the plan is that we're going to start with short reading from each of you, about 5 minutes each. Should we just come down the line this way? Is that all right? I realize I didn't consult. I hope that will be all right.
Works for me.
Works for you. Sweet.
Is it okay if I leave this on the stand and have it close to me? Does that work? Okay. Fewer things to hold is always a good thing for me. So just to give a little background, so I'm reading from The Beauty of Us, and it takes place at a boarding school called Thornton College in 1984. So you want to kind of take a trip back in time. There are three POVs. There is Zahabia, who is 15, and she is a new student at this school. There is Lisa, who is 17. She's a very popular student and a big bully. And there is a young teacher who is, she's Lebanese Canadian. And there's also kind of a fourth character who is a ghost she's a previous teacher at the school. So that's the little background. And I'm just going to read one little section from Zahabia's point of view. And just as one little piece of information, her roommate's name is May, who is mentioned here. Zahabia. My cue card size slip of paper read table B3. May flashed her own meal hall card, G2. It smells like a mix of pancake syrup and sweat, May sniffed. Yesterday, the dining room had been set up buffet style, but today there was a diagram at the door showing the seating plan for the school year. We scrutinized the 30 rectangles to find our tables. Okay, see you later. I was relieved we weren't at the same table. I was already tired of her negativity. The dining room was packed with students in Thornton's blue blazers, gray kilts, and gray dress pants. Students filed in from the kitchen carrying large platters. Sensing I was late, I hurried to find my table and wedged myself in the empty spot between two girls who, in the midst of conversation, leaned across me to continue talking. Our cottage is nice, but really boring. Oh well, at least my ankle got better and I got to swim a lot and work on my tan. I shifted back as the girl to my left rolled up her sleeve and stretched it across my chest. Short, wispy blonde hair stood at attention on her bronze forearm. You're like so lucky. My father made me do an internship at his company. The other girl rolled her eyes. Said it would be good for my university applications. Geneva, right? Yeah, the girl to my right took the passing plate of pancakes from the boy across from her. Do you want to switch so you can sit together? I asked. We're not allowed to do that, cottage girl replied. Headmaster Lowry has some kind of complicated system so that different grades and new and old students sit together. It's to make everyone feel like family, Geneva girl said, making air quotes with her free hand. Oh, okay, I'm Zahabia. By the way, I'm new, grade 12. I forked a pancake off the stack and passed it on the platter. Ashley, grade 12 also. Giselle, grade 13. Have you been here a long time? I asked, not sure how to keep the banter flowing. I poured pancake syrup over the pancake. It dribbled down the pitcher's side, and a drop landed on my new kilt. Since grade 7, Ashley yawned like a lioness, showing off her perfect teeth. I started in grade 9. Giselle passed me a bowl of scrambled eggs. It must be cool to spend the summer in Geneva, I attempted, while trying to nonchalantly rub at the sticky spot on my skirt. I guess. The talk lulled as everyone ate. The eggs were bland, but I didn't want to ask Ashley to pass the salt. I met the gaze of a boy across from me. His skin was a shade darker than mine, and his glasses a tad thicker. I'm Cyril, he said, pulling a small bottle of hot sauce from his pocket and sliding it in my direction. You might need this. I'm in grade 11, and this is my 3rd year, and I'm from Trinidad. I returned his smile, grateful someone was being friendly, but then noticed that both Giselle and Ashley were snubbing him, even though he was smiling in their direction too. Hi, no thanks. I don't like spicy food, I lied. He took back the bottle and put it in his pocket, squinting at me as though trying to make sense of my words. So Ashley, where's your cottage? I felt bad, but I was new, and first impressions mattered. So I'll just stop there. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Hello. So I'll be reading from my upcoming book, Behind Five Willows. It's not published yet. It's coming out this Tuesday. And very nervous. And I like to pitch it as a loose Pride and Prejudice retellings that set in Joseon Dynasty Korea. And it's my first attempt at writing something fluffy. All my other works have been like very bleak murder mysteries. So here we go. It will open on chapter 1, spring 1792. The countryside had exploded in a storm of colors, shimmering verdant tresses of willows, golden shoots of forsythia and bursts of flowering sansuyu trees, and purple-pink azaleas smothering the hillside and valleys. Warm gusts breezed through the village, showering petals onto thatched rooftops and earthenware pots, drifting down withered streams and speckling the parched earth. Drawing her veil over her head, Shin Hye-won journeyed through the floral downpour, pausing now and then to turn her eyes skyward. A bird glided along the mountain ridges, and she found herself wondering how she must appear from such a height. A young woman walking alone, her changot billowing like the wings of a silken green butterfly. No one would see a criminal. She clutched her travel sack tight beneath her cloak, enjoying the weight of books. What she had in her possession was breaking every rule in the ladies' etiquette manual, and she had read growing up, as well as a few laws. "Agashi!" a shrill female voice called out. "Wait for us!" Hye-won slowed to a halt, raising a hand to shield her eyes from the sun's glare. "Hurry," she answered, "before the line at the fortress gate grows too long." "A lady oughtn't to work as vigorously as you do, Agashi," the 16-year-old maid huffed as she finally caught up. "Besides, your elder sister cannot keep up. Sorry, I'm so nervous. You know how delicate her constitution is. Don't trouble yourself over me," Hye-won's older sister said with a sweet smile, though a bead of sweat trembled at her brow. "Her name is Yeon-ok, Yeon for beauty and Ok for jade, but her family had long ago taken to simply calling her Jade. I am perfectly in good health, Porama. The fatigue has lessened of late." Hye-won linked her arms with her sister, adjusting her stride to match Jade's. Last time, it felt like an eternity just to get through the gates, and Five Willows was already crowded by the time we arrived. All the books I wanted were already gone. Hye-won patted Jade's arm. "We cannot allow such a tragedy to repeat itself." "I don't know why your father allows you to visit Five Willows," Maid Poram grumbled. "Most ladies wouldn't dare visit a secret book lending shop themselves. They'd send their male relations. And did the king not reinstate the edict banning all novels a few months ago?" Hye-won shrugged. "The authorities have long abandoned any effort to enforce the ban. I doubt there will be such effort this time either." "Hye-won Agashi," Poram squeaked. "The way you speak, it gives me severe heart palpitations." Her hand fluttered to her chest, and she bore the aura of a scandalized middle-aged matron. "Novel reading is a dangerous business."
Let me begin by saying just thank you all for being here, and thank you to Hannah for inviting us. I'm delighted to share the stage with 3 wonderful writers. As Larissa mentioned, I was an undergraduate at the U of T. Lived for 4 years at Spadina and Harvard, so it means a lot for me to be back these many years later. I'm going to read a section of the novel that I've never read before. Can you hear me if I'm here? And it happens to be set in Toronto. Since we're in Toronto, I thought I would read a Toronto section of the novel. And I won't preface it too much, except to say that the main character is named Josiah Cheng. The novel is set during the Second World War, and he's journeyed from Vancouver to Toronto. Josiah stepped through the portico on Front Street and found himself across from the Royal York Hotel, a chateau-style building not unlike the new Hotel Vancouver, only larger, much larger. This, he gathered, was going to be the theme. If Vancouver was big, Toronto was bigger. Part of him wanted to splurge on a room, to take a long, luxurious bath and savor a few last hours of freedom, but mostly, he just wanted to get on with it. He hopped a red and white streetcar on Front Street, then got off at Bathurst and took another out to the exhibition grounds. This was what the officer on the train had told him to do. Take the Bathurst tripper, then Fort Lansdowne. The train had been full of raucous young men in uniform, their spirits high, and their vaunted air of camaraderie had impressed him. When he asked where he might enlist in Toronto, the officer directed him to No. 1 Manning Depot on the grounds of the Canadian National Exhibition. They might not take you, the officer warned, apologetically, but keep trying. At the end of Fleet Street, Josiah stepped out of the trapped, sun-baked air of the streetcar into the clemency of October and walked through the exhibition grounds, past the shuttered stalls of the Midway, until he came to a sprawling complex of buildings punctuated by 4 towers, each with an oxidized green dome. Normally, the complex was used for agricultural fairs, but now a sign outside read, "Go Active Now." Josiah straightened his tie, his mouth a little parched, and walked into the main building through one of 3 sets of double doors. Sure enough, right inside the entrance hall was a table manned by 2 men in peaked caps. "What can we do for you?" one of the men asked. When Josiah made his intentions known, the 2 men glanced at each other. "Identification, please," the same man said. Josiah caught a pong of livestock. He reached into his breast pocket and produced his certificate of registration, which he was required to carry at all times. The first man examined it and passed it on to the second. Josiah pictured the fine print. This certificate does not establish legal status in Canada. The second man rose, still holding the certificate. "I'll be back," he said to the first man. "Why don't you get started?" The first man took Josiah to a cool, dusky cinder block room that served as a makeshift medical station. Hospital curtain, cotton balls, eye test. An older man in a lab coat handed him a form on a clipboard, and he answered no to syphilis, gonorrhea, and every other possible affliction. Then he was told to undress. "How long will this take?" The man in the lab coat adjusted his glasses. "Physical, urine test, blood test, chest x-ray, might be a while." As soon as Josiah felt the cold bite of the stethoscope on the thick slab of his chest, the door to the room opened, and the man who had left with his certificate reappeared with yet another man, similarly dressed but gray-haired and mustached, with more swatches of red on his uniform, who took one look at Josiah, standing there completely naked, and said, "Oh yes, he'll do." Josiah was given shots for everything from diphtheria to typhus fever and told he might feel sick in the next few days, though he never did. He was issued identification discs, service record and pay books, and most importantly, a uniform. Under the watchful gaze of the quartermaster, Josiah took off his suit and tie and put on his Army-issued underwear and socks, his Army-issued shirt, trousers, and tunic, the word Canada emblazoned on each shoulder. Then he laced up his boots and strapped on his anklets and put on his field cap, which the quartermaster tipped sideways to a perilous angle. And just like that, he was a soldier. Standing before the mirror, feeling the itch and scratch of the wool, and breathing its wintry animal scent, he felt the way he had the night he met Poppy, that he had willed something into being. Through sheer impressiveness, he had forged his own reality and would go on forging it until it bent to his will. He was shown next door to the horse palace, a horse ring surrounded by 2 floors of stables. There were over 1,000 wooden stalls, all of which were being used for billeting soldiers. Each stall came with a wooden bunk bed, a small writing desk, and the sweet, warm smell of manure. The Royal York, it was not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farzana, Jane, Jack, for your beautiful readings. I always love to start these things with a reading. I love to hear people read. I know it's becoming less and less of the fashion these days to read, but I love it. I thought that was just terrific. Thank you so much. You all know, but the audience doesn't know, that I prepared a number of questions for you in advance. I was trying to think about questions that would speak to the theme of regeneration, but would also be pertinent to all 3 of your beautiful novels. So here's one that I think works. In all 3 of your books, there's an injustice at work against which the protagonist has to fight. It's quite different for each one of you. So I'd like to begin by asking you each to talk to us a little bit about what the injustice is at work in your novel, and what motivates your protagonist to struggle against it. We'll hear 3 very different protagonists, very different stories at the table. No pressure on the order. Would anybody just like to leap in? Otherwise, I'll pick on somebody.
I don't mind. Thank you for the question. And yes, I enjoyed those readings too. And also, all our books are like a bit of like historical fiction as well, which is interesting.
There is a historical aspect.
Yeah.
Different times and different places,
Yeah.
what you were thinking about.
Yeah.
Talk about that if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the injustice that is being dealt with, there are kind of 2 levels. One is that Zahabia experiences bullying, racist bullying from Lisa, and also what's going on is Zahabia ends up finding a group of BIPOC friends. They become a little group, and they figure out that Lisa, the bully, is being harmed by an adult staff member at the school. And so then they sort of conspire to solve the mystery of who that is, and then make it known who he is. So those are the 2 injustices that are at play in this novel.
It's tangly.
Yes.
It's tangly.
So for all the books that I write, they're set in Joseon Dynasty Korea, and especially towards the latter half of the Joseon Dynasty, it was very gender segregated, and so women were expected to stay, especially upper class women, were expected to stay indoors, improve the art of becoming a woman and learning how to cook well, and they were seen as daughters, wives, and then mothers. So that was the expectation. And so for all my books, the question I ask myself is, if an injustice happens, but a woman is expected to stay indoors, what kind of injustice should happen that a woman, or a teen girl in my case, so even more oppressed, what kind of injustice should happen that she would just break all the rules and step out into the world to investigate? And so for all my books, it's been either the sister they love is kidnapped, or the father they love has gone missing. And in the case of my upcoming book, Behind 5 Willows, it's the heroine really loves books, but the king has banned novels, and she needs to make money, so she goes out of the house to transcribe novels, forbidden novels. And so injustice in the case of my books, it is usually it's specified towards the question of what kind of suffering would a young teen girl go through that she's willing to put everything at stake in order to go and resolve that kind of issue. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
My novel, as you gleaned, is about a Chinese Canadian who serves during the Second World War. He serves in the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, as in fact one Chinese Canadian did. At the time, Chinese Canadians, many forget, didn't have citizenship or the franchise. And many saw service to the country as a path toward earning citizenship and the franchise. Anti-Chinese sentiment was high. And even though Chinese Canadians had served in the Great War, they were at the outset of the Second World War barred from military service, precisely because of the fear that service would lead to a demand for citizenship and the franchise. So that is the great injustice at work. Josiah Cheng also falls in love with a woman alluded to, Poppy. Her name is Poppy Miller, and she's a Canadian of English descent. And over the course of the novel, what Josiah learns is that because he's a resident alien, marrying her would mean that she would lose her citizenship status. And so this becomes a conundrum for him and the motive for him to serve. Initially, he's not all that interested in serving necessarily, but he sees there's no way out of this conundrum except to try to find a way to earn citizenship in the franchise. But it wasn't until later on in the war that various branches of the military started admitting Chinese Canadians when the need for soldiers became so desperate that they finally began admitting Chinese Canadians. And anti-Chinese sentiment was highest in British Columbia, where Josiah is from, because that's where most Chinese Canadians resided at the time. And British Columbia was against conscription, like Quebec, for different reasons, and primarily having to do with, well, if you start conscripting people, then the Chinese who are conscripted will demand, citizenship and the franchise in return. So he ventures east, which is why he goes to, well, there are various reasons he goes east, but one of the reasons is he's trying to get farther away from where there's higher anti-Chinese sentiment in the hopes that some recruiting station will take him.
Fantastic. Oh, that's so great. Gosh, we really are getting... I didn't prepare a history question, but as you're speaking, would you be willing to go off script for a second? Because it's so clear to me just in this first round how much research has gone, like historical research has gone into each of your books. Again, addressing different histories. I didn't realize that all of your novels are set during the Joseon dynasty. So you must by now know a whole lot about it.
it's a very
And then-
long dynasty.
Yeah, okay, amazing. And then you've clearly done a lot of research into, racism against Chinese Canadians in the sort of late part of the 19th and through the 20th up until the present, but especially kind of thinking around the war period. And then your research, kind of curiously, it's historical, although it goes back to the moment when I think you and I were actually, because we're historical. When we would have actually been in high school, but it was an actual different time. Would you care to comment, the three of you, a little bit on the research you did and how you're thinking about the work of time, of history? I'm putting you on the spot, I know, but I would like to hear this. Wouldn't you like to hear this?
I want to hear your answer. So.
I did do some research into the status of Chinese Canadians in mid-century. Most of my research was in other areas, in fact. The reason that the novel is called The Riveter is because before he goes off to join the army, and eventually the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, is that he works in a shipyard as a riveter on a rivet gang. Vancouver built a second yard to keep up with wartime demand to build victory ships, and he joins a shipyard. And so I had to do a lot of research into shipbuilding. And at one point, when I was on fellowship in England, I realized that the Vancouver archives had issues of the Wallace Shipbuilder, which was the house organ, the monthly house organ for Burrard Dry Dock. And so for a number of years, they had this monthly publication and everything about shipyard life, and even a whole series on how to build shipyards. And this seemed like really, really useful source, except I was in England. So I emailed the Vancouver Archives and I said, can I have every issue of the Wallace Shipbuilder from 43 to 45? And they said yes, they sent it to me. And that's what a good archive will do in support of a writer. And then, of course, I had to do a lot of research on jumping out of airplanes. The one thing I did not do was jump out of an airplane myself. That's the one bit of research I did not, yeah. It's too late for this book, but but I wanted to make sure I finished the novel, so I did not do that that research. But I did, I read everything from the war diaries of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion to nonfiction books. Canadians trained in Fort Benning because Canada, I have to remember that parachuting was a new military phenomenon, relatively new military phenomenon. And Canada didn't have a jump school at the outset of the war. So Canadians early on went to Fort Benning, Georgia. And that fascinated me because I went to Florida State. I lived in the South. My in-laws are in Florida, and one year when we went to visit, I said, I'm just going to drive up to Fort Benning. And the jump towers, 250-foot jump towers in Eubanks Field at Fort Benning from the Second World War, they're still there, the same jump towers. And I saw, U.S. paratroopers coming down what are known as mock towers, 35-foot towers with a cable that simulate landings. They slide down these cables. And so I just drove up there. I also went to the National Infantry Museum. And they had something called Company Street, where they reconstructed a street in Fort Benning during the Second World War using buildings from that period. So I walked through actual barracks and actual mess halls and stuff. So when I described Fort Benning, it was actually from walking through some of those actual buildings. Yeah, so I did some firsthand research, as well.
Wow, it's amazing. So for my book, so I wanted to write a loose Pride and Prejudice inspired story set in Korea. And so for me, I love history. I'm obsessed with history, and so I always try to make history the main character in my books. And so the question was, to write an homage to Jane Austen, what kind of historical context do I want to play with? And so a thought came into my mind, which was like, while Jane Austen was writing Pride and Prejudice, which was, there's theories that she wrote it around 1796, I was like, during that time, what was happening across the globe in Korea? And so I looked into 1790s Korea, and I was just like, I found this article about how there was something called 문체반장, which means the ban on a certain type of prose, but basically this included a ban on novels and fiction writing. And so we'd be illegal back then. And this was so fascinating to me because it gave me a look into how novels were perceived back then, which was basically it's kind of looked down on, it's seen as vulgar. And this was so fascinating because I studied Jane Austen seminar back when I was in university. And I remembered how even in the Regency era, novels weren't like praised or anything. There was a bit of like that snobby, like, oh, this is vulgar as well, and it's dangerous for women. And that parallel really struck me. And so I was like, and Elizabeth Bennet loves novels too. And so I was like, oh, I want to write about a heroine who loves novels during a time when novels are banned. And so I kind of dug into sources, and a lot of them are like written in Korean, but there's also a few by Korean American scholars who studied about censorship and book banning in Korea. And the book culture in that period, it just made my book-loving heart so happy, because I'm like, wow, people were like writing notes and margins as well, and they were dog-earing books and annoying booksellers and the librarians. And there were cases where noblewomen would go broke because they'd be buying too many books. So I wanted to capture this kind of the literary culture of Joseon Dynasty Korea and being involved in the literary community myself, like I wanted to kind of highlight the parallels that people loved books then, and we love books even now. So I had a lot of fun researching.
Well, I didn't have to work as hard as the two of you. Yes, I was a teenager in the 80s, and Zahabia's backstory is a little bit of my backstory too. The rest of the book is fiction, but what the backstory she comes into the story with is mine. And so for one weird year, when my family was in the midst of a lot of turmoil, I conspired to go to a boarding school because I had heard like a friend talk about boarding school. Like I knew nothing, but I went to the Whitby Public Library and I looked through the yellow pages of all the Ontario, like all the Ontario towns that they had there, looking up boarding schools. And I wrote down all the addresses sent off for applications. I got 2 interviews, and then I got into this one school in Belleville. And so I began from, I think I really needed to process that year 40 years ago, and I just kind of found myself thinking a lot about, like, what does it mean to be a young person? You're in this strange stage of your life where you don't have a lot of power yet, but you are almost an adult. There's so much you don't know. You're quite vulnerable. But there's also a great sense of possibility. And so the main research I really had to do for this book was to try to remember as much as I could. And then I needed to, like, I have a bad memory, so then I had to, like, watch some films from that era. So, some of the scenes, have them watching films, listening to music. I had to remember what was in the top 30. I needed to look up what were the main news stories so that I could kind of remember the feeling of that period, and everything, like from acid wash jeans, like just the fashion. I needed to, like, just remember better.
And then when you looked, did it bring it back? Did it bring it all rushing back?
It brought quite a bit of it back, and also it brought back, like, a kind of new understanding of that very weird year. Yeah.
Amazing.
I felt so much sympathy for my father at that point.
Our poor parents.
Yes.
Oh dear, oh dear. Amazing, wonderful. I have so much more I want to ask in this line, but I'm aware you've prepared things. So let's go along for a bit, and then maybe we'll circle back. So the theme of this panel is regeneration, which suggests renewal or rebirth. What is regenerated in your work? So how is she related to this history question, right? Because you're returning, you're going back, and bringing something into the present. Because it's a question about both the past and the present, and how they meet, maybe? You answer it how you want. Mm-hmm. You answer. Who would like to?
Sure.
Yeah, you go.
Okay, so I would say regeneration in the sense that my works are my way of reclaiming my roots. So for me, for most of my life, I grew up obsessed with British history, works of, Austen, Bronte, and Dickens, and when I was in U of T, that's all I focused on. I was obsessed with British literature, and I tried to write. I tried to publish my own British fiction for almost a decade, and it just wasn't working out. And my mom was like one day, like, "Oh, June, maybe one day you won't write a book set in England. Maybe you'll write one set in Korea." And I was like, "No!" Like, there was that instant, like, no, I'm not going to be that Asian writer writing about Asia. And so I think there was a bit of probably, like, subconscious discrimination towards my own heritage. Because I grew up not really, it was before K-pop and Korean skincare was popular. So I had very little exposure to my own roots. And so, yeah, that's what I grew up with, and I thought I would become an author of British historicals. But then after a decade of rejections, 100 rejections in my inbox still, that I kind of preserved like an archive, yeah, it didn't work out. And so around 2016, I kind of considered giving up on writing. But then I tried teaching, and I was like, oh, wow, teaching is so hard. Respect to teachers. And then I gave up. And then I'm like, actually, let's try writing again. But when I tried to go back to British history, it was just the memory of all that rejection was so discouraging to me. So I was like, let me try looking into different histories. And so I looked into American history, and I was like, oh, no, I don't understand this. I tried to look into Canadian history. I'm like, oh, no, I should not be writing about Canadian history. I never felt like even though I grew up in Canada, I never felt like I really belonged to Canada in a sense, but I also didn't feel like I belonged to Korea. So I was in this weird vacuum where I felt like I was an island floating around with no roots. But then I was like, you know what, let's just give Korean history a try. And so I started reading a scholarly source on Korea's past, and I just felt like, I remember like my heart was like beating so fast, and I was like sweating, and it was that feeling of like falling madly in love. And I just wanted to go up to the rooftop and like scream like, oh my gosh, Korean history, I just discovered it, and it's so fascinating. And so ever since then, all my books have been like not only a love letter to Korea's past, but almost like it's me going back to school, like regenerating, like almost like if I was born again, I wish I'd loved Korean history earlier. And so it's me back in school, catching up on all that I missed out. So every book is kind of like, oh, this is a history I'm really fascinated about. I never learned it growing up, and I want to learn it. So I kind of like, get paid to study now, because my publisher pays me. So yeah, it's my history class.
Beautiful story.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My novel ends in 1946, so this is actually before the Canadian Citizenship Act of 1947. So it ends before Chinese Canadians are granted citizenship, but the specter of that possibility is alluded to at the end. And in the strictest sense, there was no such thing as Canadian citizenship for anyone until the Canadian Citizenship Act of 1947. Canadians were British subjects. And so, it's not so much regenerated or reborn so much as just born. It's just the notion of Canadianness. And even Chinese Canadianness in particular is born out of, the service, the sacrifice, political organization of that generation. And I guess it is a kind of renewal in the sense that sometimes it's easy to forget or take for granted, the privileges we enjoy as Chinese Canadians now. It was hard won. And I think that's important to remember. Part of the reason I wrote The Riveter is because in the 80 plus years since VE Day, there's been no novel or book-length nonfiction memoir about the surface of Chinese Canadians. There have been reference books, there have been picture books, but no one has written a novel or a memoir about the surface of Chinese Canadians. And that's part of what I'm also trying to renew, as it were, is our recollection and of the surface of that generation. When we talk about the greatest generation, it's very often synonymous with, I think we picture a white generation when we talk about the greatest generation, but Chinese Canadians were part of the greatest generation, yeah.
So one of the things I was trying to write about with this boarding school was an atypical boarding school story. So the boarding school that I went to for that year attracted a lot of foreign students, and so the school was half BIPOC, which was a very unusual thing. I was, as I mentioned, I was in Whitby, Ontario, and at that time it was a small white town. It was the kind of place where there was, you know, one Indian family at the school, and it was us. There was one Chinese family, and there was one black family, you know? So it was a very different kind of experience. And so then I went and had this kind of eye-opening experience around race at this school. And so I also thought it would be kind of a unique thing to write a boarding school story with that demographic, and with the protagonists also being BIPOC girls. So I guess that's what I was trying to do that was a little new with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So another way of thinking about regeneration, I'm thinking about the dash. I'm a nerd, right? You can't stop me. Thinking about the dash in regeneration, it suggests the movement of knowledge and practice from one generation to the next. So my question now is about inheritances, right? So what's going on in Re, if anything? So my first question in that regard is, what have you received from those who went before you, and how does it appear in your work? For some of you, this is going to be a continuation of what you've already been laying on the table, but go to town.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I already alluded to it, but I think, you know, I think it's important to recognize what generations before have done for our freedoms. I mean that broadly, and in particular, you know, the generations of Chinese Canadians who've come before us. Sometimes in our, you know, in our popular imaginary, you know, those who are of color are often seen as sort of the perpetual newcomer. You know, by virtue of the way you look, there's an assumption of your newness. It's part of the reason why Josiah Cheng's family has been in Canada he's like fourth generation already. Even at the time of the Second World War, he has been in the country a long time. And of course, you know, Chinese Canadians or Chinese people of Chinese descent have been in this country for a long time and helped to build it. And so, you know, part of the novel is just an homage to those generations and what they taught us about sacrifice and loyalty and all of those old virtues.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Jack. That drive for citizenship, really, right? The contribution to the war and the drive for citizenship was a huge deal in that moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. You know, I think every single book I read is a teacher to me. But when I was thinking about that question, I was actually thinking about you. I know you're not that much older than I am, but I was thinking about you, Shyam Selvadoria, and Shani Mutu, and how your books kind of came out, you know, at a time before I even considered myself a writer, and how important those books were in terms of occupying kind of taking space within CanLit in a way that I hadn't seen before. So your books kind of gave me a sense of courage, that and also just a sense of like, oh, like maybe I could, maybe this is a possibility. So that's when I saw that question, I really thought about the three of you and your books. And so, you know, when I was writing my first novel that was, you know, about queer South Asians, I was like, oh, maybe someone would be interested in this book because your books came before. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And I mean, all the work we did, Farzana and I sat on the equity committee at the Writers Union of Canada. Farzana was really kind of leading us all in a great charge to make space for writers, for Indigenous writers, writers of color. We figure about 10, 15 years ago. But of course that work has been ongoing for a long time, and many generations have sort of taken it up, and yeah, it's important to remember that. Thank you.
I was gonna say, I think especially for BIPOC, you know, marginalized authors, it's the question of having the courage to even write our stories, right? And when I was writing my Korean historical in 2016, this was before Pachinko, before the wave I'm seeing of Korean literature. And so for me, it was that fear of like, if I write this book, is it even gonna get published? Do I even have an audience? And so that's why when I found works by authors like Ellen O, and I tried to look her up, I can't find her, but she's a really well-known middle grade author of books set in Joseon Dynasty Korea. I think her name is like Susan Lee Park. I don't know, but her books are really well known in the middle grade space. And for me, it wasn't only seeing that, oh, you know, there is an audience because someone published their books. It's also, how do I even describe historical Korea? Because I grew up, you know, knowing how to describe England, like carriages, you know, gloves, Regency era gowns and stuff. But I'm like, how do I even describe historical Korea with English? Because I'm not writing in Korean. And so reading the works of the very few authors who wrote about historical Korea before 2016, that kind of gave me the language to even describe how Korea looked like back then.
Yeah, hey, that's amazing. That really kind of bears witness to the fact that we need a whole community of writers, don't we? We really need to get out of this politic of there can only be one of each. Makes no sense. We need a whole ecosystem so that we can, you know, share and grow our vision of the past, and hopefully the present and the future as well together. Beautiful. Thank you. I think I'll ask the next two questions together. So, what are you doing in your work that's different from the work of those who went before you? And what does the current generation of readers and writers need now? Answer either or both. What are you doing that's different? So what makes your work, we've been talking about what makes your work historical, but now what makes it contemporary? What makes it belong to the present?
So, like, this isn't, I had a hard time with this question because I don't know that it's that different, but one of the contributions, one of the contributions I try to make. Oh,
Okay, tell me.
all right. So maybe you'll correct me, but one of the contributions I've really tried to make in all of my work is to address difficult social justice kinds of topics, but also in a way that's kind of entertaining and funny. And I have worked really hard to make sure that there's a lot of intersectional sorts of identities. You know, there's this book kind of addresses class in some ways, but there's also like queer characters and people of color and so on. So that's been important to me. But also, I'm a bit addicted, I think, at this point to writing from multiple POVs. Like, it seems to be what I keep doing over and over again, a similar kind of structure.
Because you're trying to illustrate something social.
Something community, yeah. And I was at Carrie Ann Long's recent book launch for Wonderland Road. Everybody read that book. And she talked about why she chose to do that, because she was really wanting to address the issues about how does a community solve things. And that really resonated with me. So these are some things that I think a lot about as I write.
Yeah, sure. I mean, gosh, Farzana, your work just sort of strikes me as so contemporary in the sense of the political issues it's taking up, and then the way that you're reading them is so entangled. So, you know, in particular, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying this, that the character who is struggling with having been harmed is not the nicest of characters. Where in an earlier moment we might have written that character as more heroic, right? So for me, there's something very contemporary in your figuration of Lisa in particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, the way I read, I don't know. That's okay.
Yeah, I found this question difficult as well because, I can't say I'm bringing anything new, but my kind of mission in writing my books is trying to convince readers, especially young readers who think history, especially non-Western history, is boring or like too other for them, to convince them that they're able, I think there are like globally, like the more you study world history, you realize there are subject matters that are universal to all of us. So to find ways to show that history is still relatable, especially if it's not your own history. And then one of my methods is I stuff a lot of genres into my book. So it's not just historical, it's a mystery. You don't like mystery? There's romance. You don't like romance? There's history. So I think I'm trying to make it as history as also commercial as possible. So not just, because I think back then when I thought of like a novel about Korea, I usually thought, oh, it's probably like a literary novel, and it's about colonized Korea, or it's lots of trauma and very highbrow literature. But I think it's also important to show that non-Western history can also be very thrilling and with lots of adventure and romance. Yeah.
Were you ever struck by the parallels between what was happening in Korean society in that moment and what was happening in British society?
Yes, exactly.
That there'd be a similar kind of gender politic at work? Like,
oh my gosh, I could nerd out about this for hours. Because when I was studying British history, I focused a lot on the lives of women. And then when I studied Korean history, I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's like so many parallels, but it's just the Korea, like the restrictions on women, it was just like on steroids. It was just so much more severe. The stakes were higher. And so, yeah, the parallels were so fascinating to me.
Actually, I want to ask you a question because I mentioned that I read A Crane Among Wolves, and it's, there's a despotic king, right? Mm-hmm. And I live in the United States, so I thought about a certain despotic leader. How much do you also think about contemporary?
I was thinking of him.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I got it. That's definitely the vibe, yeah. So as a work of historical fiction, The Riveter is not particularly sort of self-conscious or, metafictional in its approach to history. It doesn't necessarily problematize the nature of history, except to the extent that it's addressing what I feel is like a possible gap or lacuna in the history, which is that when we think about the Second World War, we tend to have a certain idea of, image in the popular imaginary of who the soldier was, who was doing the fighting. And so to that extent, I think I'm trying to do something different by centering, the story on a Chinese-Canadian character and suggesting that, the person who served was not necessarily one kind of person. And, the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion was also itself a multi-ethnic and multi-racial coalition. There were Aboriginal paratroopers and Black Canadian paratroopers, and even at the time, people of European descent identified more with their country of origin, so they identified more as Finnish or Ukrainian or, British or what have you. And so it was a diverse coalition. And I think that, what it might do for the younger generation, as it were, the readers now, is it might remind us of, the fight against fascism and how, like, maybe arguing on social media isn't exactly fighting fascism, and that there is a literal fight sometimes that's actually sort of, multitudes of difference from just holding a political point of view and arguing about it in on the interwebs. And thinking about the sacrifice of Chinese Canadians has made me think, and I think what artists do on the symbolic level of a culture is important, but it's also not boots on the ground fighting fascism. I think it's important what artists do at the symbolic level of culture, but at what point do you pick up the gun? And, midterms are coming up in the United States. Like, am I going to have to put my body on the line when they try to steal the midterms, which will happen, and it makes you think very, very literally about fighting and dying, in the name of what you believe to be a righteous cause. And everyone ought to remember that. It's not just that I wrote about one Chinese Canadian, but also in Canada, we don't remember enough the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. For example, in the United States, most people have heard of or watched or read about the Band of Brothers, right? They know about Easy Company. How many Canadians know about the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, which was our Easy Company, And so I hope the novel makes people reflect and think about those questions.
That leads right into the next one. My next question is about heroes. So you're talking about it already. What does it mean to be a hero in your eyes? But also, is our generative moment one that needs heroes? And if so, what kind of heroes do we need? And also, in what ways are your protagonists flawed? And why do you write flaws into your characters, if you do?
You got it?
You know, on the one hand, Josiah Cheng is he is the protagonist of a war story. To that extent, he is a hero, but he doesn't do anything exceptional. It's not like he does something exceptionally noteworthy, exceptional bravery, something that's medal-worthy. He's a hero just by the very nature of his service, especially serving at a time and being willing to die for a country that didn't even recognize your full humanity. But he was also a riveter. You know, people served in different ways, including in various wartime industries, right? Just serving in the shipyards, and as many people did, including women. This is where he meets Poppy Miller in the shipyards, are in their own quiet way heroic, you know. I think it really is the question of at what point somebody decides they're going to stand up, you know, in the face of power, you know. Standing up in the face of power is, however you do it, makes you heroic. So Josiah Cheng is flawed in different ways because he is capable, but as you caught, I think, a little bit in my reading, he thinks he can simply will himself to a different kind of treatment. One of his flaws is he actually subscribes to the notion of exceptionalism, that as an immigrant you have to prove yourself and be exceptional, right? You know, that you have to be exceptional to belong, to gain acceptance, to have full standing. It's like, why, if you have a different color skin, do you have to be exceptional to be human, right? And to some degree, he buys into it, and it's a subtle but nonetheless apparent, I think, critique in the and by the end he realizes, in 1946 at least, you know what? I can't will myself. I can't will myself to acceptance just by trying to prove myself. It's not enough. Not enough.
So yeah, in my book too, but even more so, the main characters in my book really don't do anything exceptional because it's supposed to be a fluffy romance story. I tried to add in sword fighting, but my editor was like, "June, no more corpses in this book." So in my previous books, it was much more easier to define a hero in the sense that they were people who were like, I know what is right, and I will stand up for it. In the case of my upcoming book, Behind Five Willows, it's quieter and the stakes are much lower. Like, her life is not at stake, but it's more like her reputation and the reputation of her family is at stake by believing that novels should be distributed, that knowledge is power, and that books give our mind wings. She is fully convinced of that. And so she continues to transcribe novels during a time when the printing press was monopolized by the government. And so she is a hero in the sense that she believes in what is right, but she's also aware of the stakes that are involved. And so, like, she has to use her cunning to try and do what is right, but also account for the fact that, you know, she's also a hero to her family. Like, she has to keep them alive, feed them, keep them from falling into ruins. And so I think when it comes to heroism, especially for a woman, there's like a lot that they have to juggle with. It's not just a black and white answer for them. And in terms of flaws, the heroine has a lot of pride and prejudice. And I think I love a flawed character, not just in my work, but in other books. I think when an author can really craft a character who's deeply flawed, it makes them so relatable because none of us are perfect. So yeah.
I think I really resist writing heroes because I also resist writing villains, right? You want to,
Morally gray.
yeah, you kind of want to put the flaws into the good characters, and you want to build in a lot of compassion and empathy for the bad characters. So I think the ways that I write is to be always thinking about that. Like when I first wrote Zahabia, she was just kind of a good character who was trying, with her community to do this stuff. But then I was like, no, that's no fun. Like, you have to have a flaw there. So I made her a bit spoiled, a little preoccupied with self only. And then with Lisa, who could have been a villain, in the editing process, I really built in a backstory of hardship for her, so that the reader would kind of understand how all of this happens for everybody, right? So I guess I resist those ideas, yeah, because I think we're.
Smokes.
What's that?
Nala
Yes,
smokes.
yes, Nala. I haven't even talked about Nala. Yeah. She's a bad Muslim in so many ways.
Wonderful. I think now might be the time to open the floor. Audience, any questions? Oh, over here. Yeah, I see two, and then this young woman in orange pants. Oh, there's a mic. There's a mic? We're going to have a mic come around?
Do you want to take one?
Thank you. It's a gentleman in a blue jacket over here. Over here.
Thank you so much. Fascinating talk. And obviously, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting than ordinary academic talk, obviously, especially started with a musical performance. So my name is Dr. Vincent Yi. I am founding director of the Institute for Humanistic Buddhist Thought and Practice at the Trinity College, University of Toronto. I'm also a teaching faculty member at the Trinity College. So even though I'm a scholar of philosophy or theology or Buddhist studies, I personally value very much about the literature, like novels or poetry. And my personal perspective is that I think novels or poetry do the much better work than philosophy works concerning about the philosophical truths or theological truths. And myself, of course, I publish some poetries, not only in Chinese, but also in English, not only in ancient form, but also in modern form. So I pretty much value the literature. So my question is simple. So for three of you, how your experience of writing or reading about the literature or novel or poetry shape your understanding about what it means to be a human being? As Jack once said, exceptional human being. And not only what do you think, but also how this understanding shape the way of you live in your daily life. Thank you.
It's a big question.
How much time do we have here? I'll try. I'll answer that in part, and I'll begin with a quote that I often cite when I'm talking about historical fiction. Dame Hilary Mantel, who wrote Wolf Hall, she said in the BBC Wreath Lectures, the task of historical fiction is to take the past out of the archive and relocate it in a body. And that is the difference between, let's say, reading academic texts or reading history itself, reading philosophy perhaps, and is that stories were I teach a whole course on the evolutionary purpose of stories, but in short, stories were the first virtual reality. They gave human minds the ability to live outside themselves through a story. And if you're writing any kind of story, historical or not, you are trying to take information, knowledge, facts, and create an embodied experience for the reader. And it's in living those many lives, right, outside of our own, that we develop hopefully, right, greater depth and understanding of what it means to be a human being. And to your point, maybe literature and poetry does teach better because it offers that embodied experience. And the brain makes no distinction between that embodied experience and lived experience. And when you describe a smell, the olfactory part of your brain lights up as if you're smelling something, but only if you're concrete, not if you're abstract. And so, it's that embodied experience that gives you the deep knowledge.
So something I wrote in my book, because it's about novels and the love of novels, is the heroine basically says that she hopes that novel readers, or she assumes that novel readers will be kinder, more empathetic, and open-minded because they've lived 10,000 lives through 10,000 heartbreaks and joys through literature. And I am a firm believer that people who read novels, and especially diversely, are hopefully more empathetic, and I think it shapes my own empathy and my desire to understand someone, because I've started to imagine that every single person, everyone here is a masterpiece in and of themselves, and it's the question of if I don't, for example, if I don't like someone, if I don't understand how they are like, I remember they are a story, and I need to understand that the several 100,000 chapters they contain to really understand why they're behaving in a certain way, why they might, hold beliefs that are so contrary to me. They're a story, and I need to understand them. So I think that really shapes how I look at other people and interact with others.
I'm not gonna, all of what you said was just perfect. Just in terms of the piece where you asked about, how does it change us as well? I feel like each novel that I write, because they take so long to write, I feel like I end up, writing a dissertation or, something like that in the process of writing a novel. And then that means you go so deep into your own feelings and thoughts about the particular issue that you're writing about. You might have started in one place and you end up in a completely different, much deeper place. So I think it's also, beyond just how it changes the reader and how that can impact society, I think we end up being really changed beings as well. Our souls get enriched through the writing. Yeah.
Great answers. Thank you. You're in the lovely orange trousers.
Thank you, Larissa. Well, I guess I have to stand up because of the lovely orange trousers. Well, first of all, I really loved your questions because those were some of the ones that I was curious about too, and thank you for the panelists for answering them. So my question in short is, why do you write fiction? And I'll give some context to that question. So I wrote a memoir. It's coming out next year, and I found the whole process extremely draining because everything had to be real and had to be based in reality. And what was curious to me is all three of you write fiction, and two of you, I'm not saying Farzana you don't, but the two of you are really curious about a body of work that you did a lot of research on. So it's fascinating to me why you chose fiction as a way to bring forward this body of knowledge instead of writing nonfiction. And even my publisher said, you know, when's your next book going to be written? I said, it is not going to be nonfiction anymore. But that's my own thought about writing nonfiction. But I'm so curious about why you chose fiction to bring forward. And Farzana, you do so much advocacy work. Like, your work could very well all be nonfiction too. Just kind of sharing some insights about why you chose fiction.
That's a great question. Yeah, fantastic. Tell us your name so we can read your memoir when it comes out.
Sure. It's Yolanda Zhang, and it's called Dear Younger Me.
Nice. And when is it coming out?
That's great.
May 4th, 2027.
Wow, right.
Hannah, I'm happy to be
You've already got the self-promotion down, which is it's so important, right?
so important.
Why fiction? Why fiction?
Why fiction?
Well, I've heard it said that you don't choose your genre chooses you, and I think it's partly because I failed at other genres. It's like, I guess I'm not a poet anymore, and so, but I think I chose fiction in part because a lot of people probably feel this, that their own lives are not exceptional enough to glean a story from. And of course, that's, you know, to June's point, like every human being is a novel, right? There's a story, there are multitudes actually within everyone. And if you know how to look, you'll find the story. But when I was young, I guess I wasn't good enough or brave enough to, you know, to see the story within my own life. But when I first started writing fiction, I wrote sort of semi-autobiographical fiction that never really seemed to take off. And it wasn't until I transposed my own experiences through the lens of historical fiction, and I, you know, tried to write about what I knew of the world through, you know, the Chinese Consul General in Vienna in 1937, or you know, Chinese-Canadian couple during the Second Sino-Japanese War, you know. That's when the stories sort of seemed to take off. And so for me, it was just the ability to invent more freely that was attractive to me. For interestingness, maximize interestingness, just to invent, be able to invent.
I also did not think my life was very exceptional growing up. I was always into mystery shows, mystery books, and thrillers when I was young. And I remember thinking, I wish I was braver and just like good at, I wish I knew how to do martial arts. And it was a lot of, I wish I could be like XYZ. And so I think I go into fiction because I'm so aware of my flaws. Like, I know if there's a serial killer in this room, I'm gonna hide. I'm not gonna go like chasing after them, trying to solve like a mystery. I'm gonna hide. But deep inside of me, I know what is right. I know what I should be doing. But because I'm such an anxious scaredy cat, I know I won't do it. And so I think through fiction, I try to confront a lot of my fears, the skeleton in the closets, because there's an ideal version of me that I want to reach that I cannot, maybe not even in this lifetime, but through fiction, it's me constantly challenging myself, confronting myself. Yeah. And then the other part of the question was... That was it. Oh, yes. That was it.
Good for you for writing memoir. You know, it is, I think that it does bring its own particular challenges because it is so vulnerable. besides what has already been said, I think that one of the nice things about fiction is that it's so immersive that you can really kind of get into some very difficult issues, and people will keep reading. Like, I think about my last novel, which is about a form of gender-based violence that makes everybody flinch when they read a report about it or they view a documentary about it. But I wrote a novel about it, again, trying to make it entertaining and a little bit funny. And it was kind of interesting, that book, it's called Seven. When I was promoting it, over the next couple of years, I lost count, but I did over 200 talks on that book about the subject matter. So some of it was going directly at the subject matter, and then a little bit about the characters. Mostly that's what it was. People wanted me to come and talk to them. Book clubs, festivals, all that kind of stuff. So it was very interesting. It was a way to talk about a very invisible, very silenced issue through characters. So I think that's what I really feel is one of the strengths of fiction, is you can do the social justice work, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah, for having this array of fantastic panelists, and Professor Lai for the very interesting question, exploring question. This is for Jun He. As a keen student of history, I'd like to make this comment. When you were answering in response to Larissa's second last question about the historical and mixing with the contemporary, I was in the washroom, so I missed what you have said in the first part. But I did take note back in time when you talk about how you're deep reading into British history, and then you go back to your roots and look into Korean history, about the patriarchy, which is very confusion, and it's actually originated from China during the past dynasty, in particular the Song dynasty, when Korea actually inherited the Confucian ethic and patriarchy. So perhaps you know this already. So that's my short comment. And of course, Farzana, as earlier mentioned, I like your watermelon pin, and that's what you're doing right now, right here, about your social justice interest. I really enjoy Jack Wang's, because I was also spending time in Ithaca, but a different college, university on the hill. I'm very intrigued by your deep interest into Chinese Canadian history, but it's interesting, when you give your sharing, you both mixed, as a licensed writer, you both mixed World War I history and World War II history. So I'm a bit confused. I thought your book is about World War I, but actually it's about World War II, and I like that, because World War I is a bit too distant for me, coming from Southeast Asia, because World War I is more like a European, they're slaughtering each other, whereas World War II, there's more World War with the Japanese involvement, and so I have more connection with World War II, because also Force 136 went to that part of the world. Eventually they won the boat and the franchise. So thank you for your sharing your process.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank.
Hi, my question is directed to Jack. Jack, you mentioned that it was kind of your idea to write this story about a Chinese Canadian soldier. And when I heard about your book, I was very excited by that, and I was super pleased to read it. But even more so, I thought you had a terrific love story that you threw into it. So my question is really about process, and I was wondering, at what point in the writing did Poppy kind of appear? Like, was she there when you started the book? Was the idea that it would be a love story wound around this war story, or did she kind of show up somewhere and then gradually kind of take over and become the person she was in the book?
That's a great question. Thank you, Ed. That's wonderful. And actually, I did not know all three stories are love stories. I never noticed it until you said that. So please answer, but then maybe the others would like to talk about love stories as well. But go, Jack.
Yeah, at one point the Riveter was called the Riveters, and I had imagined more Chinese Canadian characters who were friends in the shipyard and go out to various theaters of war. This is one of the dangers of research, is that there's so much interestingness and you want to put it all into one novel. And eventually I realized I needed to focus. But from the beginning, even when there were many more characters, I had imagined the Riveter of this Rivet gang being in love with a woman, and the challenges of that relationship. So I think Poppy was always there. She went through different iterations, but I eventually landed on Poppy, not only because, you know, Poppy, of course, is synonymous with service, and therefore Canada itself. And in many ways, the relationship is kind of an analog to the larger relationship between Chinese Canadians and the nation state itself, and the questions of fidelity, because this relationship and the questions of fidelity within their personal relationship mirror larger questions between the Chinese Canadian community and the nation at large. But I also landed upon Poppy and was really happy with the name when I realized that it was a diminutive form of Penelope. And it's hard to write a war story about a hero who's trying to find his way back home without thinking about, right, Odysseus and the Odyssey. And so while I always imagined a love story, I think Poppy Miller developed over the course of writing the novel.
Would you like to speak about the love stories in your works as well? Because you're both also really thinking about that.
Yeah, like for me, it's how do I make history as thrilling as possible? So that was my tactic. Not love story, then mystery. Not mystery, then history. Not history, there's romance and mystery. Yeah.
I wouldn't have actually thought too much about describing the book this way. I think that the main love story is of the group of friends, that they're the love.
Yeah.
Although Zahabia does have, this sort of budding relationship happening, while the other two characters are engaged with somebody pretty terrible. So I really think about it as the love of friendships for my book. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Beautiful, amazing. I think we have time for one more, and then we might call it a day. There is one more out in the audience. Here in front here.
Thank you very much for this panel. When I reflect upon the sharings and the insights, I'm reminded of a Nigerian writer that I respect a lot named Bayo Akomolafe. And he questions lines of inquiry around identity, because he says he is more interested in what we give up to belong than the markers of belonging. And I feel like all of your novels speak to this. And I just wanted to offer that as a comment.
Would anybody like to respond?
What we give up
To
to
the question
belong.
of what one gives up to belong, how it's Asian Heritage Month, right?
Yeah.
So it's a month in which we're celebrating our Asianness. Something is gained by that. Is something also lost? Or what is gained by taking up this frame, working within this framework? And you may, at different times and different moments, we may or may not choose to wear it, right?
Yeah.
What is gained? What is gained? What is lost?
So, what is gained is something that is very soulful for me, and also to be in these kinds of spaces and in these kinds of communities like that's just gorgeous. But there is some hardship. I feel like, I feel like white male authors in Canada are never labeled in those particular ways. They're just authors, and so I think sometimes there's a way that we can be limited as well through our identities, because maybe a mainstream audience will say, well, that doesn't appeal to me because that's not my identity. The same thing happened around how many of my earlier books got labeled as queer fiction when I just thought they were fiction. So pros and cons, yeah. I think we want to be part of things, but we also want to be part of the larger, right?
So for me, I think what is gained and what I give up, I didn't even know I was a author of diasporic literature until I published my Korean historical fiction. I remember really wrestling with whether I, as a diasporic Korean, had the right to even write about Korean history. It took me a year to muster up the courage, and then finally I wrote about Korea's past with much fear and trembling. There are moments where I'd wake up at night and be like, oh my gosh, did I get this historical fact wrong that maybe Koreans in Korea know that I don't know? So I'd research to fact check. And so I think what is lost in the sense was that protection, kind of. I didn't have to really ask myself, am I Korean enough to even write about Korea? I didn't have to wrestle with that question until I began to write about Korea. And I remember when my books got translated into Korean, I was so scared. Because my editor told me when I published my first book, usually the Korean industry doesn't really translate young adult English literature, but they translated it, and I was like, oh my gosh. So what was lost initially was that sense of I didn't have to engage with questions that I found really difficult to me. But then what was gained was my books were actually received decently in Korea. And so I think, even though I am Korean and I was raised in Canada, though, I think I don't need their affirmation, but at the same time, the fact that my books were received well without being super criticized or anything like that, I think it was that reassurance that I've done my best, I've done the work. And so there was a sense of coming home kind of feeling that I got.
Yeah, that's a great question. We could, spend a lot of time talking about it. I think I'd respond in just two ways. One is, the question of identity is related, I think, also to the author and who they're imagining they're writing to, because there is something in the industry where people of color are expected to be basically kind of an explicator to a white audience, and here's where identity has a lot of play, and its marketing tool, etc. And so I think, this is one question: who's the intended audience? Who does the author imagine writing to? And so one of the hallmarks of a book that's written with a white audience in mind is the need to explain things. The act of translation within the text itself, explicating things that people within the community already know, right? And Viet Thanh Nguyen, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Vietnamese-American author, his advice is don't explain. Don't position your narrative just toward the white audience. Don't explain things.
Take out the glossary.
Yeah. Don't explain. And so there's, so identity can be complex, and it has to do with the audience and intention. And I think I wanted to say something else that my mind is sort of pinging around, and I think there was something else, but it's evading me right now. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you so much, all three of you. And to that, I might add, that it's been fairly recent, here in Canada that it's been possible for people who look like any of us on this panel to have access to the publishing industry at all. And that capacity, well, as we were saying earlier, was really hard fought for by an earlier generation of writers. So much as one might wish to, I mean, I think we would all wish to write from the fullness of our humanity, that is the desire and the wish. But then by the same token, one can't necessarily take one's public voice for granted. And the reasons for which we've been shut out from that voice have had to do with race. And so many of us claim it for that reason. And it doesn't mean, and therefore we want to stay there. But sometimes we do, because there's also community and a sense of a shared struggle that revolves around it. So I would just sort of add that to the panelists' wonderful comments. And I think with that, we've arrived at time. So I'd love to thank Farzana Doctor, Jane He, Jack Wang, and also to thank Hannah Kim for the beautiful curating. So Hannah is the one who put this all together, for the wonderful organizing, for the amazing hosting, for inviting me to moderate. Thank you so much. Thank you, the audience, for your attentiveness, for listening.
Thank you so much to Larissa, Jack, June, and Farzana, sorry. And thank you so much to all of you for being here and being part of this community. And happy Asian Heritage Month to everybody here. And I hope to see you next year again in this room. And we will have the book signing, so please join us at the front, and we will open for the refreshments. We smell something concrete, right? So it's time for the refreshments. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. That was great.